All right, for Save Me a Seat, we are on chapter 38, which is called Joe. I can't believe my eyes. I actually blink a couple of times to make sure I'm not seeing things. Is there really a blue peanut M&M sitting in the glass dish on my desk? The answer is yes, but what's weird is that it's not the same one I brought from home. I'm positive that was a single. This is a double. Those are rare, especially the blue ones, which is how I know who put it there. Chapter 39, Ravi. I'll get us started, says Mrs. Beam as she reaches into the basket. She pulls out a card and reads it aloud. On my honor, I will try to serve God and my country, to help people at all times, and to live by the Girl Scout law. That's easy, shouts Dylan, jumping out of his seat. It's Selena. Who else would be dorky enough to still be a Girl Scout in 5th grade? Mrs. Beam's eyebrows are twitching. As I explained a moment ago, Mr. Samreen, she says, the person who reads the sentence is the only one who's allowed to guess. In this case, that person would be me, not you. Dylan sits back down, and Mrs. Beam walks over to Selena's desk. She is the girl in the green uniform who had brought my things to the nurse's office. Is that you, Selena? Mrs. Beam asks, placing the card next to a loop of green cloth with medals and badges pinned to it. Selena blushes and nods her head. Now it's your turn, says Mrs. Beam, holding the basket out to her. Selena pulls out the card and reads, Blondes have more fun. Gee, I wonder who that could be, Dylan says. Selena walks over to Lucy Mulligan and places the card next to the silver hairbrush sitting on her desk. Is that you? She asks Lucy. Duh, Dylan sneers. Of course it's her. This game is a joke. Mrs. Beam frowns at him, then holds out the basket to Lucy, who reaches in and pulls out the next card. I rule, she reads. I'll give you a hint, says Dylan. He turns on his ridiculous plastic star and the music starts blaring. Ghetto superstar, that is what you are. Dylan jumps up on his chair, sticks out his long tongue, and starts waving it to the music. The way it moves reminds me of the leeches wriggling in Thorippa's tea strainer. Mrs. Beam's eyebrows are not twitching any longer. They've become a straight line now. She walks over and turns off the music. Please get down from your chair, she says. As Dylan starts to climb down, he happens to glance over at Bigfoot's desk. When he sees the blue candy in the bowl, his eyes grow very wide, and a look of pure shock comes over his face. Yes! Chapter 40, Joe. Do you know who the card belongs to? Mrs. Beam asks Lucy. Lucy nods but doesn't move. Is something the matter, Lucy? asks Mrs. Beam. I don't want to see the leeches, she whispers. What's so scary about a couple of stupid old worms? Sneers Dylan. Ever since Mrs. Beam shut down his superstar routine, he's acting kind of grumpy. Lucy gives him a dirty look. Hallelujah! Maybe this means the wedding is off. Ravi has his hand up. Yes, Ravi, says Mrs. Beam. I notice she says his name for the first time with the accent on the second syllable. Could you please tell Lucy Mulligan that the lid on the jar is screwed on very tight? My grandfather and I made sure of that. The leeches will not escape. Nothing to worry about. See? He lifts the jar and turns it upside down. No water leaks out, but turning the jar over like that gets the leeches all freaked out and they start wriggling around even more than before. I expect Lucy to start screaming again, but instead she walks over and tosses the card down on Dylan's desk without even looking at him. Then she turns and smiles at Ravi. I didn't know you knew my name, she says, tilting her head to one side. I look at Dylan to see what he's making of this disgustingly mushy moment, but he isn't paying any attention to Lucy. He's got his eyes glued to the jar of leeches. I know that look. I've seen that 1,000,000 times. Chapter 41, Ravi. It's your turn to pick a card, says Mrs. Beam, holding the basket out to Dylan. He groans. This game is so lame. What's the point? You can't even win. Try to muster a bit more enthusiasm, will you, please? Says Mrs. Bean. Not every game has to be about winning. If you ask me, Dylan is getting off easy. Mrs. Arun would have made him kneel down on the floor or sit facing the wall if he had talked back to her like that. Dylan makes a big show of swirling his hand in the basket to stir up the cards. His overacting is even worse than Shakti Kapoor's. I can't believe I ever wanted to be his friend. Abracadabra, he says, pulling out a card and waving it in the air like he's done something special. Nobody responds, not even Lucy Mulligan, who is busy staring at me for some reason. Dylan shakes his hair out of his eyes and reads what is written on the card. Quitting is not an option. He rolls his eyes. Gee, I wonder who this could be. Then he marches straight over to Tim or Jim, I still don't know which it is, and puts the card down on his desk. Is it you? Dylan asks in a voice that says he is confident his guess is correct. Nope, says Tim Jim, shaking his head. It's not me. Dylan can't believe his ears. What do you mean it's not you? It has to be you. Everybody knows you're the kid that won't quit. Tim Jim looks at him and shrugs. It's not me, he says. You see? Mrs. Bean's pistachio eyes are twinkling like little green stars. Maybe this game isn't so easy after all. Well, if he didn't write it, who did? Asks Dylan, looking around the room. I wink at him and smile. I did, I say. Chapter 42, Joe. He cheated, shouts Dylan. That's why I couldn't guess it. What do leeches have to do with quitting? Would you like to come up to the front of the class and tell us how the two things are connected, Ravi? Personally, I would have been sweating bullets if Mrs. Bean made me stand up in front of everybody like that, but Ravi doesn't seem nervous at all. In fact, he looks happy. He pushes up his glasses and clears his throat like he's about to give a speech or something. I'm listening, but I'm also keeping an eye on Dylan in case he tries to mess with Ravi's leeches while he's busy giving his speech. Quitting is not an option, Ravi says. This is what my father taught me, and what his father taught him, and what I will teach my own son someday too. Big deal, says Dylan. What does that have to do with leeches anyway? I told you he cheated. Shh, says Mrs. Bean. Go on, Ravi. Ravi pushes up his glasses again. I haven't prepared anything else to say, but I could tell you a story if you like. Chapter 43, Ravi. I rub my nose and push up my glasses. My hands are shaking a little, so I fold them the way we were taught to do in elocution class at Vidya Mandir. For many generations, the Suryanarayanan family has worked with tea, I begin. When my grandfather was a young man, he worked in the tea plantations. His job was to protect the tea pluckers from wild animals that might be lurking nearby. I look around the room. Everyone is listening. Some are even leaning forward in their seats. I decide to bring a bit more drama into the story by adding a few details Paripa had not included in his version. Have you ever been attacked by a porcupine or a wild boar? I ask, pawing the ground with my foot. Have you ever seen a panther crouching in the grass ready to pounce? Or been stuck in the middle of a war between two angry elephants? I pause and look around the room for dramatic effect. All those years of elocution lessons are really paying off. Imagine it is monsoon season, I say. Imagine the ground is still damp from the heavy rain, a perfect hiding place for the most dangerous creature of all, more dangerous than the porcupine creature, or even the panther. This animal can latch onto you and bite through even the toughest flesh with its 300 razor-sharp teeth. What the heck? Says Jax. Be quiet, Caleb Burwell tells him. I want to hear about the teeth. There is no time to lose momentum, so I take a deep breath and dive back into the story. Well, my grandfather battled these tiny Draculas in disguise every single day. Imagine yourself plucking tea under a hot sun when suddenly you realize you are surrounded by viscous black worms waiting to fix themselves to your body and drain your lifeblood out. Look, there's one between your toes. Be careful, there's one behind your ear. Believe me when I tell you, those dreaded blood-sucking leeches can even crawl up your nostril. Just as my tale is building to its climax, I am interrupted by a loud choking sound. A moment later, the air is filled with a horrible smell. "Check it out!" shouts Dylan Samarine. "Emily Mooney just blew chunks!" Chapter 44, Joe. Apparently all that stuff about giant blood-sucking leeches climbing up your nose got to Emily, and she barfed up her breakfast. Kids are running around screaming. Dylan is laughing. Emily is bawling, and Mrs. Beam is calling the office to tell them to send the custodian down to room 506 quick with a mop. I feel bad for Ravi. He was having such a good time up there telling his story, and now all anybody can think about is Emily's barf. Mrs. Frost was right. It must be really hard coming all the way from India to New Jersey, especially when you have to deal with somebody calling you names and stealing your mechanical pencils, not to mention hitting you on purpose with a softball. I look at the beautiful blue double peanut M&M sitting in the bowl in front of me, and whoop, zoop, sloop, all of a sudden I get this great idea. Chapter 45, Ravi. The smell of the vomit is overpowering. Girls are screaming. Emily Mooney is crying, and Dylan Samarine is laughing his head off. Mrs. Bean tells me to return to my seat. Then she asks us to take out our copies of Bud Not Buddy. We'll go to the library and read until the custodian has had a chance to clean up. When we return, we can continue our game. Poor Curryhead, says Dylan as I take my seat. His speech was so bad the audience puked. I ignore him and pull out my copy of Bud Not Buddy. That's when I notice a folded up scrap of paper lying on the desk beside the jar of leeches. I unfold it and read, Beware, do not touch the jar. Trust me, Joe. It has been a day full of surprises, and it seems there will be one more. Chapter 46, Joe. As we line up and start down the hall toward the library, my stomach is in a knot. Can I really pull this off? Dylan Samarine is up ahead, sticking his tongue out at Lucy Mulligan while she ignores him. Ravi hasn't said anything to me, but I know he read the note. I saw him. I hope I know I'm right about Dylan, but the closer we get to the library, the more I wonder if I was crazy to think that my plan would work. And then it happens. The first domino falls. Oops, I forgot my book. Dylan tells Mrs. Bean, I'll be right back. Here goes, I think. This is it. As I turn and watch Dylan walk down the hall, I think about all the mean things he's done, not just to me, but to Ravi. Zebras have to stick together. I want Ravi to feel the way I felt when I saw that double M&M sitting in the bowl. As I watch Dylan Samarine duck into room 506, all I can do is hope that after all these years I know him as well as I think I do. I cross my fingers and begin the final countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. No! The door bangs open, and Dylan comes flying out of room 506 like a bat out of you-know-where. There's a terrified look on his pants and a big wet stain spreading across the front of his pants. I can't believe it actually worked! When I saw Dylan eyeballing those leeches earlier, I knew it was only a matter of time before he tried to swipe them. And like everything else he's taken, I also knew where it would end up. Dylan is jumping up and down now, swatting at the front of his pants, until finally the glass jar falls at the bottom of one of his pant legs and rolls across the floor. Talk about an epic sequence. Chapter 47, Ravi. What kind of fool puts leeches in his pants? Loosening the lid had been a capital idea, nothing less than pure genius. Dylan is running around like a headless chicken. Then the bully of Albert Einstein Elementary School drops his pants and runs screaming down the hall in his starry underwear. Brilliant! I say a secret prayer of thanks to my grandfather and to the poor innocent leeches who sacrificed their lives for this important occasion. Later, after Dylan Samgreen has called his mother to come pick him up, and the cleaner has finished wiping up Emily Mooney's vomit, we return to the classroom. Would you like to finish telling us your story, Ravi? Mrs. Beam asks. No, thank you, I say. I don't need to show off anymore. I'm not like Dylan Samgreen, and I never will be. I believe it's your turn to guess, Ravi, Mrs. Beam says, holding the basket out to me. I close my eyes, make a wish, and pull out a card. There is more to me than meets the eye, I read. Ah, says Mrs. Beam. Now that's a tough one, especially for you, Ravi, because you're new here. Would you like to choose another card instead? Something that might be a bit easier to guess? I shake my head. This is the card I wanted to get, the one I had wished for. I carry it over and set it down beside the glass dish with the blue candy in it. It's Joe, I say. Joe nods, then lifts his head and looks at me. I smile, and he smiles back. His eyes are brown, the color of the cinnamon sticks Amma brought with her from Bangalore. How in the world did you ever guess? Asks Mrs. Beam, impressed. It was easy, I tell her. These candies have 4 layers. Most people assume they only have 3, but assumptions are often wrong. There is more to them than meets the eye. Did you learn that in India? Asks Mrs. Beam. No, I tell her. I learned it here from Joe. Chapter 48. Joe. My mom and dad are both pretty smart people, but the truth is, they don't know everything. Turns out, you don't have to punch somebody in the nose or blab about your feelings to get your point across. Sometimes, all you need is a little help from a friend. There are some things about my life that are probably never going to change. Like, for instance, my awesome metabolism or the fact that I have APD. But I've only been in 5th grade for 5 days, and I've already noticed a big change. The other day, when Mr. Barnes told me that the world was full of Dylan Samreens, I was pretty bummed out. But now that I know it's possible for a couple of zebras to outsmart a crocodile, life is starting to look up. Not only that, but it's Friday, pizza day. Chapter 49. Ravi. I have always been Amma and Appa's shining sun, and my grandparents' pride and joy. But today I have learned something important. Winning is not always about shining the brightest. Sometimes it's about sharing the light with someone who has been waiting in the shadows all along. It is 11:30, and the bell has just rung. My first week at Albert Einstein Elementary School is almost over. Amma's black tongue was right after all. Things have turned out okay. As I pick up my tiffin box and walk out of room 506, I feel like a new person. I haven't decided yet whether I will eat my curd rice or try the pizza today, but it doesn't matter because I know I will not be eating my lunch alone. When I get to the lunchroom, I know my new friend will be saving a seat for me. And I am right. The end. And that is all of Save Me a Seat by Sarah Weeks and Gita Varadarajan. Isn't that a great book? Wonderful book to start off the school year with. Hope you enjoyed it.